It's October 30th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with the latest developments over in Gaza. Israel has now launched what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is describing as his country's second war for independence. The death toll in Gaza alone exceeded the 8,000 mark over the weekend. As South Korea observes the first anniversary of the crowd crush in Itaewon that killed 159 people during last year's Halloween celebrations, President Yoon said Sunday he will continue working toward building a safe South Korea. And starting today, South Korea and the U.S. are conducting a joint large-scale aerial drill involving stealth fighter jets as part of joint efforts to deepen defense capabilities against the military threats from North Korea. Tensions are soaring in Gaza as Israel expands its ground operations in the region. In fact, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the war has entered a new stage which will be long and difficult. Shin Se-byuk reports.
The Israeli military continued its ground operations in Gaza throughout Sunday. The Israel Defense Forces said it destroyed Hamas anti-tank positions and killed several gunmen on the Gaza coast and at the Erez border crossing. Since it expanded its ground operations in Gaza on Friday night, the IDF has targeted Hamas operatives and positions, hitting hundreds of underground tunnels and bunkers. As the war rages, Israel's military in a televised briefing on Sunday urged Palestinians in Gaza to evacuate northern regions, calling it urgent.
Over the last 2 weeks, we have been calling on residents of the northern Gaza Strip and Gaza City to relocate southward temporarily. We are today emphasizing that this is an urgent call.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also said the war against Hamas has now entered a second stage and warned it would be a tough one.
The war inside the Gaza Strip will be long and difficult, and we are ready for it.
There have been suggestions that the IDF is now using siege tactics on Hamas. According to The Economist on Sunday, the IDF has now shifted its strategy to an encirclement tactic and slower campaign. This comes according to the report as the Israeli military reportedly set up a base in Gaza on Friday, unlike in previous operations where they withdrew from the Strip overnight. This way, Israel's invasion of Gaza would be more gradual, which could help it avoid inflicting mass civilian casualties. The British publication also highlighted that the strategic shift aims to deplete essential supplies like fuel and food stored in Hamas' underground tunnels and bunkers. Citing a high-ranking Israeli official, The Economist said that this ground operation could take up to a year. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Now, the death toll in Gaza continues to increase, crossing 8,000. Meanwhile, Iran's president warned Israel has crossed the red line in the region, which may force everyone to take action. Lee Seung-ja has more.
The death toll in Gaza has surpassed 8,000 since armed conflict began between Israel and Hamas on October 7th. According to Gaza's health ministry, the number of injured as a result of Israeli airstrikes is also approaching 20,000. The ministry added that the death toll may actually be much higher, with many people still trapped under rubble. As rescue teams continue their search and rescue operations, a total of 1,800 people are reportedly missing, with 1,000 of them being children. With Israel continuing air raids in Gaza, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said Sunday that Israel has crossed the red line in Gaza, which may force everyone to take action, hinting at the possibility of Tehran getting involved in the conflict. Taking to social media, President Raisi said the U.S. told Iran not to do anything, but Washington continues to give widespread support to Israel. Meanwhile, the U.S. had initially questioned Iran's involvement in the October 7th attacks. U.S. intelligence suggested that Iranian officials were also surprised by Hamas's attack and that Tehran was not directly involved in its planning, resourcing, or approval. Meanwhile, during a visit to Nepal, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for the protection of all civilians in Gaza. While Guterres condemned the October 7th attacks by Hamas, he expressed regret that Israel has intensified its military operations instead of a humanitarian pause supported by the international community. He also urged those with responsibility to step back from the brink and called the situation in Gaza a humanitarian catastrophe. Guterres visited the country to extend condolences to the families of 10 Nepalese students killed by Hamas in southern Israel on October 7th. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea and the U.S. will conduct a large-scale joint aerial exercise this week involving stealth fighter jets to enhance combined readiness against North Korea. Seoul's Air Force said last Friday that the 5-day Vigilant Defense at 24 will kick off on Monday, involving South Korea's F-35A fighters and tanker transport aircraft, as well as U.S. F-35A and F-35B fighters and other warplanes. The allies aim to enhance the interoperability of those advanced fighter jets through airborne alert interdiction and close air support operations. North Korea has long accused the Seoul-Washington joint drills of being rehearsal of an invasion, often launching provocations as a protest against them. South Korea's military spotted a North Korean vessel drifting in the waters near the northern limit line in the East Sea on Sunday and provided humanitarian support. According to the Joint Chief of Staff on Sunday, a maritime patrol aircraft detected a rescue request from an unknown vessel stranded 3 kilometers north of the NLL before confirming it came from North Korea. The military said the people on the vessel had been adrift for 10 days, requested food and water, and wished to return north. The military provided food and water on humanitarian grounds. It also notified the North of the situation through the United Nations Command and other communication channels. This incident comes 5 days after a North Korean boat carrying suspected defectors across the NLL in the East Sea. China's top diplomat Wang Yi's visit to the U.S. ended with a promise from both countries to make a Biden-Xi summit happen at the APEC summit next month. Now, will the meeting reboot thorny Washington-Beijing relations? For more, we're joined by Jeff Min this morning. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
The road to make that summit come true may not be so smooth. Now, Wang Yi said himself that autopilot should not be relied on to achieve that summit to make it come true. Now, what does that mean?
Wang's comments are a recognition of the fact that despite high-level desire to improve relations, the U.S. and China face very difficult issues, and there have been setbacks. For example, the spy balloon incident was an unanticipated mini-crisis that stalled diplomatic process for several months. Right now, there are a half a dozen different issues that could develop unpredictably and generate friction. There are international issues like the Middle East, the South China Seas, Ukraine, bilateral issues like tariffs, export controls, and China's reckless flying behavior in the Taiwan Straits, and even domestic issues like the U.S. elections and China's faltering economy. So all of these issues need to be managed carefully between now and any summit meeting, and that's why Wang Yi is cautioning that the U.S.-China relationship is not on autopilot at this point.
Sure, a wide range of security, economic, and even domestic issues may get in the way before that summit actually takes place. Now, what does Wang's mention of the Bali meeting signify then?
Well, the events leading to this potential summit date back to August of 2022, when then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited China. China claimed that visit violated its One China principle, and it cut off all bilateral dialogues. In November of 2022, Presidents Biden and Xi met at a G20 meeting in Bali, and they decided there to take steps to stabilize relations. That decision led to a series of high-level visits between the countries to better understand positions on issues, with the hope of an eventual summit meeting between the presidents at the November APEC meeting in San Francisco. So it's widely assumed that at the top of Wang Yi's agenda during his recent Washington visit was tacit agreement, even though there's no announcement, for the summit to occur, and plans for specific areas of agreement for the leaders to discuss and then perhaps announce publicly.
Would you still say the agreement on working on that summit is still a big step made between the two sides? What do you think?
Both American and Chinese observers have said that U.S. China relations have sunk to their lowest level since the 1970s. So from that perspective, restarting the relationship is a big step. In addition, all of the major problems in the world involve the U.S. and China in one way or another, and their cooperation is really essential in terms of achieving outcomes. So, for example, cooperation between the two countries could significantly improve the global response to climate change and pandemics. So improving U.S.-China relations is not only a big step, but it's a necessary step for purposes of enhancing global peace and prosperity.
Sure, Washington and Beijing indeed have come a long way, but is it fair to say the Biden-Xi summit will actually be a turning point for defrosting their tensions?
I think that the anticipated summit could be a turning point in relations, but we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that the relationship is going to return to the status quo. China has spent the last year issuing policy statements outlining its vision for a world that is separate and distinct from the democratic, rules-based, market-governed world that China pretended to want to join for the first 30 years of the U.S.-China relationship. China recently announced global government initiatives, which include initiatives in the areas of security, development, and even civilization. And this vision defines an alternative world order. The Chinese vision is an authoritarian world with a state-run economy and mercantilist trade policies. That vision is fundamentally different from the Western vision, and I think that China's new aggressiveness in pressing that agenda internationally is probably a recipe for more friction in the future.
Right, and South Korea is also closely following the developments between the two countries. And what will that soften U.S.-China relations mean for South Korea, actually? Is there anything good or beneficial for Seoul in the near future?
Any improvement in U.S.-China relations can only be beneficial for South Korea. In fact, I can't think of any downside. For example, South Korea's top priority is managing the ongoing threat from North Korea. China is one of the very few countries that has friendly relations with North Korea, so China can perhaps facilitate useful communications and help moderate North Korean behavior. South Korea will also benefit from U.S.-China cooperation addressing transnational threats like climate change. And then in the economic realm, improved U.S.-China relations might also facilitate positive trade relations between South Korea and China. China has in the past launched punishing boycotts against South Korea, but better U.S.-China relations along with close U.S.-South Korea policy coordination could moderate Chinese aggressiveness.
Indeed. All right. Thank you so much for your insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Yoon vowed to do his best for public safety, expressing sorrow in remembrance of young people who died last year when Halloween street celebrations turned into a deadly crowd crush. On Sunday, the president attended a memorial service at a church in northern Seoul, marking a year since the fateful day that the accident occurred when some 100,000 people flocked to the streets of Itaewon, a nightlife area in Seoul, to enjoy Halloween festivities. 159 people died, most of them in their 20s. Offering his condolences to the bereaved families, Yoon said it had been the saddest day of his life.
오늘은 제가 살면서 가장 큰 슬픔을 가진 날입니다. 대한민국 국민 모두가 저와 같은 마음일 것입니다. 불의의 사고로 돌아가신 분들의 명복을 빕니다.
He said it is the duty of Korean citizens to make the world a better place where everyone can enjoy safety in their daily lives. He pledged stronger efforts on government's part to make the country safe so that the sacrifices of the lives lost would not be in vain. So it's been 1 full year since the devastating incident happened here in Seoul. What changes were made since then and what still needs to be done? Our Song Yoo-jin reports.
October 29th, 2022. Itaewon, a popular nightlife spot in Seoul, witnessed an unimaginable tragedy. A crowd crush resulted in the loss of 159 lives. 1 year later, we reflect on the question of what's changed. The absence of adequate crowd control measures has been pinpointed as a major factor. This year, director-level personnel from the Interior Ministry, alongside firefighters and police officers, are being deployed to areas expected to see overcrowding both before and after Halloween. Seoul City government is installing around 8,000 AI-enabled closed-circuit TV cameras. These cameras can detect and alert authorities to dangerous crowding. But there are still challenges.
There's now an emphasis on local governments to manage events that do not have organizers like the Itaewon Halloween festivities. But it's unclear whether every region has enough personnel and resources to do that.
The impact of tragedy has been psychological, too. Over 7,000 individuals have sought counseling. Mostly the general public after being exposed to unfiltered graphic images and videos of the accident online.
Trauma can resurface any time in the future. If you need help, you can access free treatment programs at national and regional trauma centers anytime. Local mental health and welfare centers also offer various counseling and programs related to mental health.
Back in Itaewon, instead of the customary Halloween festivities, the streets are calm, with some streets posting signs paying tribute to the victims. So this is the exact spot where the deadly crowd crush happened last year, and now, as you can see, it's now a place where people will be able to forever remember those who lost their lives on the night of October 29th, 2022. Messages of condolences fill the walls. People continue to stream in to pay their respects. They hope something like this will never happen again.
And whenever I walk down here, I always pause and stop and I pray. Yeah.
Avoiding large gatherings is just not realistic, so I think it's absolutely crucial to have public servants, firefighters, and police personnel involved in crowd control.
Since the accident, I've experienced some trauma when it comes to large crowd gatherings. Nonetheless, I believe that people heal through one another. My wish is for these interactions to take place in areas that are comfortable and safe.
October 29th, 2022 will remain etched in the memory. Those who are lost will be remembered by those endeavoring for a safer future. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
10 days on from the first confirmed cases of lumpy skin in South Korea, lumpy skin disease in South Korea, the total number of farms with infected cattle rose to 61 on Sunday. The latest case came out of Muan Jeollanam-do province to mark the first case of the disease in the region. A total of 4,107 cattle have been called or are being called at farms with confirmed cases. The outbreak has also expanded to 7 cities and provinces. With an emergency vaccination order on all cattle across the country being issued, vaccinations will take place until next month. Here in South Korea, we are in the middle of the vibrant autumn foliage season, and this year it's expected to be even more colorful than usual. Our Choi Soo-hyung has the story.
The mountains turning yellow and red means that autumn is here. In South Korea, peak foliage occurs when over 80% of the mountain's trees change color. It usually starts on Seoul Mountain in Gangwon-do province, east of the capital Seoul and the country's coldest region. From late October this year, famous fall foliage attractions across the country are set to welcome visitors.
The mountains near Seoul have already reached their peak autumn leaves, and mountains further south like Gae-dong-san and Naejang-san are expected to have their peak fall foliage by early November.
One nearby location from Seoul is Yongmunsan Mountain in Yangpyeong-gun County, Gyeonggi-do Province, which boasts diverse tree species that determine the colors, making it a great choice for an autumn picnic. In particular, the maple trees along the track to Yongmun Temple. Its fall foliage started 9 days ago and has now reached its peak, displaying a variety of colors and beautiful landscapes.
It was my first time going on an autumn foliage trip this year, and the timing was just perfect. The autumn leaves had beautiful and vibrant colors, and when I climbed up the hill, seeing this, it made me feel peaceful and relaxed to relieve lots of the stress.
According to the Korea Forest Service, the leaf-changing season has been getting about 0.33 days later each year since 2009, likely due to rising temperatures from July to September. This year's peak fall foliage arrived 4 to 5 days later than usual, and these colorful leaves will stay for around a week to 10 days. People can still enjoy other parts of South Korea if they miss the northern and central mountain attractions. Those who want to explore autumn colors should pack their bags and have their calendars handy to start planning. The Forest Service said this year's fall foliage may be later, but due to temperature variations, it's expected to be more vibrant. 최수향, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Kim Si-young, and we'll now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the U.S. where a shooting in the Florida city of Tampa early on Sunday morning, local time, has left 2 dead and 16 hospitalized. The gunshots came during a street fight between 2 groups amid a crowd of hundreds of people leaving bars and nightclubs in Tampa's Ybor City neighborhood just before 3 a.m. Police initially reported a total of 18 casualties, which has been confirmed by Tampa Police Chief Lee Burko as 2 deaths and 16 injuries. Burko also stated that a 22-year-old suspect has been arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Now, moving over to Kazakhstan, where the death toll from a mine fire on Saturday has increased to 45. The fire at the Kostenko coal mine appears to be from a methane blast and was more deadly than initially reported. On Saturday, the local office of the steelmaker ArcelorMittal, which operated the mine in Kazakhstan's Karaganda region, stated that 206 of 252 people have been evacuated. Emergency teams at the mine are still searching for 1 remaining miner who may have been underground. In the world of sports, 22-year-old tennis player Italian Jannik Sinner won the Vienna Open on Saturday, defeating Russian Daniil Medvedev for the second time this month in an ATP 500 final. World number 4 on the ATP Live rankings, the young Italian managed to get the upper hand in a 3-hour match against the world number 3, Medvedev. Just 3 weeks ago, Sinner had beaten the 27-year-old Medvedev for the first time in 7 attempts to win the China Open in Beijing. The Italian has now won 10 titles, 4 of them in 2023. American actor Matthew Perry, famous for his role as Chandler in the TV series Friends, has passed away at the age of 54. The Emmy-nominated actor was found dead at his Los Angeles home on Saturday. The cause of death has been cited as an apparent drowning. He is best known for his role in the sitcom Friends, which ran from 1994 to 2004, winning an Emmy Award in 2002 for Best Comedy Series. Perry was publicly open about his struggle with addiction to alcohol and drugs, which he mentions in his 2022 memoirs.
Doing it in the
Good morning. Enchanting autumn colors in central areas are in full swing. Over the weekend, our beloved leaf peeping spots were packed with visitors. Southern parts of the country will also see autumn colors expanding this week. In fact, we will be seeing much warmer than season temperatures throughout the week. There will be big gaps in readings today, which will help to develop autumn colors to become even more vibrant. But swings in inland areas could be nearly 20 degrees Celsius in some parts of the country, so please do dress accordingly. Temperatures will be similar to yesterday in most parts of the country under bright sunshine nationwide. Seoul and Daejeon sees highs of 21 degrees Celsius. Daegu, Gwangju, Busan topping out at 22 degrees. Sunny skies will dominate most places this week, except in the capital and west of Gangwon-do, with rain in the forecast in the midweek. Then next week looks to be much colder, so make the most of the warmth while you can. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Tuesday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? I'm live!
저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 이거 먹지 펜션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고
좋아요.
Hello, I'm Gustav Slamečka, Czech ambassador. Arirang TV is doing its best as a media diplomacy channel representing Korea by delivering current affairs information and news in a balanced voice. Everyone I meet can get news about Korea through Arirang, and we are thankful. I hope Arirang TV will continue to take the lead in delivering Korea's news to the world, and I hope it will be a channel for the world and Korea to synthesize. Resonating with the world, Arirang.
Real
Korea hydro and nuclear power envisions a world flowing with energy as clean as the blue skies, where we can enjoy energy without worrying about the planet by finding new alternative sources to achieve carbon neutrality through clean, carbon-free energy. KHNP is creating a new future for a carbon-free world. Korea hydro and nuclear power.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
We're here to make a new type of news. New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's October 30th here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Jessica Dainhong.
Happy Monday, everyone.
Happy Monday. And Park Ki-hoon.
Thanks for having me.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Our first story. American actor Matthew Perry, best known for playing Chandler Bing in the 90s sitcom Friends, was found dead at his home on Saturday. Authorities did not cite a cause of death, but identified no sign of foul play. What we know so far was that Perry was found dead in his hot tub. Perry was only 54 years old, and soon after news broke out, fans over the world shared their condolences online. And moving on, the Asian Para Games held in Hangzhou, China wrapped up on Saturday. Team Korea ranked fourth with a total of 30 gold, 33 silver, and 40 bronze medals. This year's Asian Paralympics was dominated by China, which hauled over 500 medals. Second was Iran, and third was Japan. And last but not least, one of the hottest headlines in Korea at the moment is the romance scam that two-time Olympic fencing medalist Nam Yeon-hee has been caught up in. It all started last week when Nam told the press that she had decided to get married to a third-generation skion of the Paradise Hotel and Casino conglomerate. But as soon as Nam revealed her fiancé to the public, many reached out to her, claiming that he was in fact a fraudster. Now here's some claims that actually pushed two-time Olympic fencing medalist Nam Yeon-hee to call off her marriage in just a few days later, and even report her former fiancé to the police over stalking charges. One, her husband-to-be turned out to be a biological woman, and Nam later told media that she knew Chun was a transgender man, but said she had been gaslighted into thinking that Chun had gone through a sex change operation. Chun reportedly made the Olympian think that she was pregnant by using tampered pregnancy tests. Now, the second claim that Nam was going through is that her ex-fiancé Chun Chung-jo had no relations with the Paradise conglomerate. Also, Chun's background story turned out to be completely fabricated. Chun claimed to have been the illegitimate son of Paradise Group, born out of wedlock, and also claimed to have been a professional horse rider who had lived a long time in the States after attending NYU. But in reality, Chun had lived most of their life in Korea and was in fact sentenced multiple times over fraud. And day after day, we're seeing more accusations pile up against Chun Chung-jo. We're also seeing more of the public wonder how this fencing medalist Nam could have been so gullible. Now, here in the studio, starting with you, Kyun, what did you think about this story?
Oh, I am 실례예요. Not. I think this story seems to get more hilarious day by day. She or he is only 27 and has already brainwashed so many naive people, but which seems kind of amazing and talented on one side, but I kind of read into it as well. Chun's father is also a fraudster on the run after leeching off millions of dollars from women through his romance scam. So obviously she's learned it from her dad, which is not a surprise. But I think all eyes of the public are on this kind of funny, incident. But I just hope that this is just not a cover-up of other more important issues happening right now.
I think a lot of people in our generation think that every single time we see baffling news like this, some have conspiracy theories as to whether we're actually looking at what's the most important thing right now. And also to explain your inside joke on I am 실례해요. As I told you before, Chun Chong-jo built up his whole background story saying that she or he lived abroad in New York and he's not that fluent in Korean. But then there's this meme now where the message he sent to his friends or stuff, it shows he can't speak fluent Korean, and that's why he used mixed Korean with English, and that's why people are making memes out of it. So you can tell that a lot of people from our generation are using this incident to make funny memes, and they are putting a lot of attention to it. But what are your thoughts on that?
It reminded me of a Netflix series that is on about this woman who sort of built her identity, just like you said, as a German billionaire, and actually people all fell into it. So I think the one interesting thing about this news is the psychological game that people play for vulnerable people. But other than that, I would like to be a little bit honest and say, while it is a big issue and there's a lot of fraudulent and criminal cases that are involved, it's really a relationship issue between the two people. And I think there's so much media attention that is being paid right now. So I hope this does not sway us from more important issue, much like the news generation topic that we will be covering today.
And speaking of our topic of the day, let's switch on to what we'll be discussing on this Monday. If you take a look at the screen, you'll find out. We're going to go into our main discussion for the day because it's been a full year since the tragic Itaewon crush tragedy, and my AI voice secretary will explain what we went through this time last year. It was a tragedy nobody expected. A tragedy that killed 159 people. Last year on October 29th, thousands of people, mostly those in their 20s, went out to one of the capital's most popular nightlife spots, Itaewon, to enjoy the Halloween festivities. Just after 10 p.m., the chaos started. Many were jam-packed in narrow alleyways, only about 4 meters wide on their way to the next bar or club. Witnesses recall how the large crowd suddenly collapsed like dominoes. In the process, people toppled on one another, suffocating. Eventually, 159 people died, including 26 foreigners. Another 196 were injured. Their families and friends have been scarred for life. 1 year ago yesterday, we witnessed a tragedy that took the lives of many people from our generations. Officials had estimated 100,000 people to pack the narrow alleyways of Itaewon, which is only around 4 meters wide. And that's because last year was the first virtually unrestricted Halloween in 3 years. Now, though I wasn't there on the day of, I was there the next day for a live cross, and I can tell you, it was quite devastating. Now, do you recall that night, and if so, how?
It still gives me goosebumps thinking about that night. But on that night, I was actually in my neighborhood just with my friend, and I got a text from my other friend. She sent me a clip of what was happening at that time in Itaewon. And at first I thought it was just some kind of some fun event that people were doing in costumes because it was Halloween. But then the next moment, it was all over the news channel, and then I thought, wow, this really happened. And then, just like you, because I work in the news department, it didn't really kick in until the next day when I started being updated, listening, and just watching all those, those unfortunate clips. To be honest, this should never have happened, but it has, and it has left a big scar to all Korean citizens and the society and the country. And it's something that should never be overlooked in the coming years.
For sure. Yeah. What about you, Cheska? How do you remember that night?
So I was actually in LA, so my time zone was flipped. And I remember because my American neighbor brought this article and said, hey, there's a stampede. She used the word stampede, and I've never heard that word before. It's just stampede that was happening in Korea. And I know the exact area, like Itaewon area, the district and the streets. And at first I thought it was something like, you know how we have a very crowded subway? Yeah. So, you know, it's after COVID, so maybe they had a record number of visitors and maybe some incidents happened. And then the death toll started coming in. And I just remember being, you know, completely overwhelmed. And later I found out that actually one of my college classmates was on the scene, and she unfortunately passed away. And while I never knew her personally, it just hit me a lot different, because not only do I know the exact street and the area, it's only like 10 minutes away from where I live, but the fact that someone that I might have known or that I somehow crossed paths with on a college ground was on the scene, my age, passing away, I think it just hit young people differently. Yeah.
For sure, and my deepest condolences to your friend and her family. I think a lot of us could relate, because every Halloween in Korea, though it's not a Korean traditional holiday, I think a lot of people are very excited to go out to the streets and party, because it is a freebie night where you go with your friends and go to all these hottest nightclub districts. But then again, nobody really expected to see this ever happen. And officials have braced themselves to prevent anything like this tragedy from ever happening again this year. That's why we've seen thousands of police dispatch the most popular nightlife districts in the capital, where people would go to enjoy Halloween festivities. So why don't you guys walk us through how this year's Halloween scene was like compared to last?
Sure, I think I can talk a little bit about Itaewon. There was definitely a lot of people who were there to commemorate the tragedy. And I think just between my friends, I think it was a lot calmer and quieter. Not many people were going out, and the government and police have taken measures to prevent further incidents from happening. So if we take a look at the screen, and one of the measures that was actually implemented was they decided to have a total of 909 CCTVs to be installed around Seoul so that it can monitor. And it sends an alert system for about 150 people in an area of about 350 meters square. So that is about a people density of 0.3 people every meter square. And now, while I'm very glad there are measures being implemented and taken to prevent further tragedy, you know, it's always so sad that only after a tragedy happens, people do start to take measures and, you know, preventionary, cautionary measures too, much like what happened in Seoul incident, right? Only after a tragic incident happens, then people, the crowd, kind of comes together and tries to prevent it from happening. So I hope it serves as a lesson for these kind of things to never happen again.
For sure. And this year around, I'm well aware that Itaewon wasn't as bustling compared to last year, right?
Yes, unlike the quiet atmosphere in Itaewon that Jessica just talked about, places like Hongdae and Gangnam were a little different, especially Hongdae in the main streets. They were reported to be very crowded. It was very crowded with bars and restaurants all packed, with long queues of many youngsters lining up to get into nightclubs. But luckily, you know, there were enough district police officers on the scene, setting up barricades, as you can see on the screen, with people, you know, still dressed up. And they were controlling the direction and the density of people on foot. So it was very, very safe. So up until now, there have been no reports of any crowd-related accidents, which is a very positive and a good sign. And that local authorities are much more alert on days of festivals like Halloween that we experienced over the weekend.
And it's really nice to see stronger preparatory measures this time around. We didn't see any deaths or casualties happen for Halloween, but there were many debates in regards to whether it's actually appropriate to celebrate Halloween. So here in the studio, it'd be great if you guys can tell us a bit more about the surrounding arguments and where you two personally stand on this matter.
You know, that's a very valid question. Some people, because Halloween is not an official holiday, many are saying, you know, we should completely abolish it and not celebrate it because it only causes, you know, mishaps and tragedy. Personally, I'm a little bit torn, because while I understand that there are people who, you know, want to still commemorate and, you know, remember the day as a tragic incident, just because an accident happened on a day, shutting it down, I don't think actually resolves what happened. So instead of, you know, everybody sort of rallying up and say, oh, we should completely shut down the day, I think what's more important is just because it happened on a Halloween, doesn't mean it's going to happen again on Halloween. It could happen on our subway trip. Exactly. It can happen anywhere when there is an unregulated area and people aren't vigilant enough, people aren't careful enough, and people get overwhelmed. So I don't think it's a matter of Halloween, but more of what other things that could happen that we're ignoring until a tragic incident happens.
And I completely agree. I hope people don't go out and bash people for going out to hang out on Halloween, because as you mentioned, it just happened to be on Halloween.
Exactly.
It's something that we should be vigilant about on a daily basis. Now, what about you, Yoon?
I'd like to talk a little more on behalf of small shop and restaurant owners. Especially around that Itaewon area. More shops have reportedly closed down compared to COVID lockdowns, and the overall sales are far from recovery margin. And, you know, many business owners are in debt, you know, close to shutting down, or even have already closed their businesses. So it seems a little unfortunate and unfair in some sense. Look, it's only right to commemorate this day, but completely erasing this day and not celebrating forever doesn't seem like the correct way to deal with it. So, you know, let's say hypothetically, if something bad or tragic happens on Christmas Day, should we not celebrate it from the following year? That's very questionable. Yeah.
And I think another argument was the people who are living need to live. You know, that is hard, but I think that is also true because we are seeing a lot of livelihoods still affected from the Itaewon tragedy, especially, as you mentioned, in the businesses near the alleyway. Now, despite debates, one argument seemed to be posing some sort of middle ground, and that popular opinion was learning from past mistakes by finding the root of the problem and making sure we know how to cope after a national tragedy like this, and this is still an ongoing task. That's why we asked our viewers if they've ever experienced a national tragedy like us here in Korea and how they've coped with it since, or if they saw any measures come forth that helped the country as a whole move on. Take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them had to say. Let's start with Tira's Bell. The Flint, Michigan water crisis comes to mind. It lasted for 5 years where the residents were exposed to high concentrations of lead in their water. As a result, stricter water quality standards were imposed. Hannah said the 2019 Kyoto animation arson attack was a devastating loss for the anime industry around the world, claiming the lives of talented creators and destroying irreplaceable work. It's a stark reminder of the importance of mental health awareness, workplace safety, and vigilance against violence. Bradley Denny said in the U.S. we must take our shoes off at the airport because of a shoe bomb one time. And the reason why I think that there's just so much debate in the first place is also because there's remnant trauma. An integral part of moving on is first acknowledging that incidents, whether like be the Itaewon Crush tragedy or all the different national global events that are happening around the world, it can definitely cause trauma. Then the next step is learning how to treat it. That's why we're going to include a mental health expert in our talks to find out just how to do that. We're now going to talk to Jeannie Chung, a mental health expert specializing in grief and trauma. She's also been actively trying to educate people on the importance of taking care of your mind as much as your body. Great to have you here with us, Jeannie.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Jeannie, so I think I want to focus this part of our discussion on defining trauma. Could you first define it, and how would someone know that they actually are going through trauma?
Trauma is an emotional response to, I would say, a horrific, terrible, distressing event in one's life. Example of the Itaewon tragedy. When they know, I always say that you guys are the expert of yourselves. So you don't necessarily need a mental health expert like myself to tell you that you're traumatized, because trauma can be experienced individually by anybody. What I mean by that is it can have a unique experience. Just because there's a national disaster does not mean we all experience it the same way. Some folks will not experience it right away, like the symptoms. Some people experience it years later. So you know you're feeling traumatized, or there's something traumatic that you're experiencing by the distressful symptoms you're feeling, or if it's hindering your daily functioning. That's pretty much those obvious ones. And obviously there's other symptoms that a professional can help you through.
Then once you recognize that you have trauma, what is one, effective process or way that you can sort of treat or deal with your trauma?
Well, I'm going to say this, of course, as a therapist and a mental health expert, it is processing through that trauma. It is a process, meaning talking it through, discussing what you're feeling. And would be, I would say, in therapy. Getting that help that you need, it especially is critical immediately following a traumatic event. So again, you don't need a professional to say you need help. If you're feeling distressed, can't sleep, anxious, fearful, depressed, following an incident that you experienced that is terrible and horrific, then go seek somebody that you can speak to, process those thoughts, share those emotions in a safe space. And that is actually a big part of tackling that trauma early on.
Jeannie, do you think South Korea has been doing a good job when it comes to helping people with trauma from the Itaewon crush tragedy, and what was done well and what needs more work?
So again, that's a little bit sensitive because I don't live in Korean society, but here's what I've seen and observed, actually talking a lot of folks, especially in the younger generation. What I wanted to see happen was an immediate, I would say, coming in and providing all those resources from the get-go. I didn't necessarily see that, and that is actually very critical. It can actually turn into post-traumatic stress. Not everyone experiences PTSD, by the way, after a trauma. That critical period of perhaps a week to 2 weeks is very important to get the help you need, to get the attention you need. And so I think the very important thing, I'm going to say this, is folks need to feel validated. They need to feel seen. They need to feel heard. So that is the families, the victims' families, survivors, people that witnesses, friends of victims need to feel like, hey, you're hearing me out. I have this burden, the grief that I'm experiencing, the distress. Can you hear me? Can you commemorate? Can you acknowledge that this was a horrific tragedy? Just say it. So it does not have to be complex. A solution at the very end of the day is hearing folks out and being like, you're right. This happened. This was terrible. I'm grieving with you. Tell me what we can do. The solutions will come, but hear them out and actually acknowledge that this was such a terrible event. It's going to take time to heal, not just 1 year, who knows, years later. And I think that's what I'm seeing lacking, that empathy and compassion of acknowledging how bad this was.
I completely agree. And in order for us to be empathizing, I think we need more places where we actually discuss it. It needs to be discussed more, and people need to feel open and comfortable enough to acknowledge that. Thank you so much, Jeannie. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would like to point out, I do think we are going in the right step in the right direction, given that yesterday at Itaewon we saw a lot of commemorative events also in City Hall. So the nation is definitely acknowledged that this could be a very traumatic scar in our generation and just for our nation as a whole. But what do you think still needs to be done, Cheska?
I think Jeannie said it perfectly. I think at the moment what we really need is not pointing fingers to blame someone, but compassion and empathy. You know, people need to be heard, people need to be validated, people need to be commemorated. And even though we didn't go through it, some people didn't go through it, just being there and listening to people, I think, is very important.
Very briefly, do you have anything you'd like to add on, Q?
I think just moving forward, more citizens, including ourselves, need to be a bit more conscious of personal safety, especially when we go to crowded places. So being a bit more educated and just be a bit more aware of our surroundings will definitely prevent any of these kind of tragedies from happening.
And hopefully our episode really posed those answers for you, and you can take these guys' suggestions right here on better dealing with anything, whether it be trauma or just happening with your daily life, just talking about it, acknowledging that you could be heard, and just facilitating better discussions is the key today. In the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dainha.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And Park Ki-hoon.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News
Generation.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's mine? Make sure you listen to what I say.